Your brain starts making decisions you don't know about at hour 42. Not bad decisions you can identify and correct, decisions that feel exactly like good ones, processed with full confidence, executed without hesitation, and functionally wrong. The neurological mechanism is not dramatic. It does not feel like impairment. It feels like clarity because the part of your brain responsible for evaluating your own judgment is the first system to degrade. By the time you are alone, responsible for your own security, and fighting the body's demand to shut down, you are not choosing between rest and readiness. You are choosing between controlled rest and involuntary collapse. One of those happens with a protocol. The other happens to you. Your body will take the sleep it requires. The only question is whether you are in a position you selected or one the situation chose for you when your eyes closed without permission. 5 protocols. Yeah, all of them learnable before you need them. The Walter Reed Army Institute of Research Sustained Operation Studies document that after 72 hours without sleep, cognitive function is equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.10%, legally impaired in every jurisdiction in the United States. The finding that matters most is not the impairment figure itself. It is the self-assessment data. Individuals operating at that level of deprivation cannot accurately gauge their own impairment. The degraded brain cannot measure its own degradation. You believe you are thinking clearly, you are not. Every solo survival decision made past hour 48 carries this variable. Knowing the timeline is the first step. The 5 protocols that follow address what to do about it. At hour 24, you are still functional. Slightly irritable, slightly slower, but decision-capable and self-aware enough to recognize the fatigue accurately. At hour 36, the degradation becomes behavioral. Threat assessment slows. You categorize ambiguous stimuli, sounds, movements, unfamiliar shapes at the edge of your vision, as safe or dangerous with less accuracy and more confidence simultaneously. That combination is the dangerous one. Accuracy drops, confidence holds, emotional regulation begins to fail alongside it, and in a solo collapse scenario, impaired emotional regulation produces impulsive decisions that carry a different class of consequence than they do in ordinary life. At hour 48, the body introduces microsleeps, involuntary sleep episodes lasting 1 to 10 seconds. They occur without warning. They do not register in your memory afterward. You experience them as an unbroken period of wakefulness. You are not awake for all of it. At hour 72, reaction time has degraded by up to 300% compared to rested baseline. Auditory and visual hallucinations are documented in standard populations at this stage, not in clinical outliers, in normal people under sustained deprivation. The person living through this timeline believes they are monitoring their own degradation accurately. They have already lost the evaluative capacity to do so. This is not a willpower failure. It is a biological mechanism that operates completely outside of conscious control. The correct response is not to fight the timeline. It is to build a protocol that accounts for the fact that the timeline is running whether you plan for it or not. You will sleep. The only variable is whether you planned the where, the when, and the how before the 48-hour mark erased your ability to plan clearly. Most people select a rest position the same way they would in a non-threat environment, for physical comfort and warmth. Flat surface, sheltered corner, concealed spot that feels safe. Those priorities are correct, and they are incomplete. The correct rest site has 5 properties. Comfort is the last one you evaluate. The first is elevation, or concealment. You need one or the other, and both where the terrain allows. A position 3 feet above the ground level approach routes changes the acoustic profile of anyone moving toward you and provides a reaction window that flat ground does not. The second is natural barriers on at least 2 of the primary approach vectors: rocks, dense brush, water, walls, or steep terrain that redirects any approach toward a narrower set of paths. The third is a single defensible choke point on the remaining open approach. You cannot monitor all directions while unconscious. Reduce the number of directions that require monitoring to one. The fourth is an exit route that differs from your entry route. A rest position you cannot leave undetected in an emergency is not a rest position. It is a trap. The fifth is a rest surface or surrounding ground that produces acoustic output when disturbed. Loose gravel, dry leaf litter, snapped dry branches, any natural material that generates sound under the compression of a moving body at close range. This functions as a passive perimeter layer independent of anything you construct. Identify the site before you need it. Walk every approach vector from the outside in. Assess the position as though you are the threat moving toward it. Stay or move based on what you find. Wire. That is the single most effective improvised perimeter alerting material available without dedicated equipment. A strand of wire or strong cordage stretched at ankle height across the most accessible approach vector. Anchored to a noise device at one or both ends, creates a passive acoustic alarm requiring no power and no active monitoring. The noise device can be anything that sounds on contact. Metal objects loose in a container, cans with stones inside, dry branches balanced to fall against a hard surface. The critical variable is not the device. It is the anchor tension. Too tight and ambient movement, a breeze, settling ground, a small animal passing through, triggers it and trains you to ignore it. Too loose, and a moving person steps over the wire without generating sound. The correct tension resists a slow brush contact but yields audibly under the deliberate forward step of a body moving at normal walking pace. Test it with your forearm before sleeping. Know exactly what it sounds like when triggered correctly, and know the difference between that sound and environmental noise before you close your eyes. Secondary alerting requires no construction at all. Dry leaf beds and loose gravel at natural approach angles function as passive acoustic surfaces. A footfall on dry leaf litter in still air at close range is significantly louder than most people realize until they test it. Position your rest site so that any approach across that surface reaches your hearing before the person reaches your position. Carry 15 feet of fine wire specifically for this application. Build the perimeter before you finalize the site, not after. 20 minutes. That is the target duration for a solo survival rest cycle, and the specificity is neurological, not arbitrary. The human sleep architecture progresses through 5 stages. Stages 1 and 2 are light sleep, heart rate drops, muscle tension releases, and the body begins physical recovery. Stage 3 is deep, slow-wave sleep, the most physically restorative phase, and also the hardest phase to exit cleanly. Waking from stage 3 produces sleep inertia, a state of grogginess, or slowed cognition and degraded motor function that persists for 30 to 60 minutes after waking. In a threat environment, 30 minutes of post-wake impairment is a tactical liability you cannot afford. A 20-minute rest cycle targets stages 1 and 2 exclusively. You enter light sleep. Physical and cognitive recovery begins. You wake before the body reaches stage 3 before inertia sets in, alert within seconds rather than minutes. After 3 or 4 consecutive 20-minute cycles across a 12-hour period, cognitive function approaches rested baseline despite never achieving a full sleep session. Military sustained operations research applies this protocol in long-duration field operations when uninterrupted sleep is tactically unavailable. Set a physical timer before closing your eyes, not a mental note, not an intention. A physical alarm set before sleep at the lowest effective volume, or on tactile vibration if available. Position your body so that waking and reaching alert-ready stance requires minimal movement. Practice this cycle before you need it. The first time you attempt micro-resting under acute stress is not the time to discover that you consistently sleep past the target. You are in position. The perimeter is set. The site meets every criterion. Your body is at 40+ hours of wakefulness, and you cannot sleep. This is the most common failure point in any solo rest protocol, and it is purely neurological in origin. Acute stress activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream. Both suppress the sleep onset mechanisms the body requires to initiate unconsciousness. The more critical the situation feels, the more powerfully the stress response fights the sleep drive, even when that drive is biologically overwhelming. Attempting to force sleep directly increases the problem. Telling yourself to stop thinking about the threat reliably elevates cortisol rather than reducing it. The override protocol uses two parallel mechanisms applied at the same time. The first is controlled breathing. A 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 6-count exhale cycle activates the parasympathetic nervous system and begins cortisol suppression. Within 3 to 4 minutes of sustained application, the stress response hormone profile begins to shift. Do not stop if the first 30 seconds produce no result. The effect is cumulative. The second is cognitive load redirection. Do not attempt to clear your mind. Occupy your working memory with a structured, neutral, repetitive mental task. A route you know traced in detail, a sequence you have practiced, a counting pattern with a specific internal rule. This engages the prefrontal cortex sufficiently to prevent threat rumination without generating new stress activation. Applied together for 5 to 7 minutes, these two mechanisms initiate sleep onset in most individuals regardless of prior arousal state. Practice them before the scenario. The nervous system responds to practice protocols. It does not respond to first attempts. Step back from the 5 protocols for a moment. Not one of them requires equipment you do not already have. Not one requires training you cannot complete before you need it. Every protocol in this video, the collapse timeline, the site criteria, the wire system, the 20-minute cycle, the breathing and redirection sequence, addresses the same root problem. Your body has biological requirements that do not negotiate with the situation you are in. Sleep is not a reward for completing the tasks. It is a function that occurs whether you planned for it or not. Every serious preparedness plan accounts for what happens when external resources run out. Water, food, fuel, power. At what point did you plan for what happens when your own cognitive function runs out? That is the one resource no resupply chain restores. Gone. The collapse timeline tells you when your decision-making becomes unreliable. Behavioral changes at hour 36, micro-sleeps at hour 48, full cognitive impairment at hour 72. The rest site selection gives you 5 criteria that determine whether sleeping alone is defensible or a liability. Improvised perimeter alerting with calibrated wire tension and natural acoustic surfaces converts the rest position from a vulnerability into a monitored space. The 20-minute cycle maximizes cognitive recovery without triggering sleep inertia. Controlled breathing and cognitive load redirection override the cortisol response that prevents sleep initiation under acute stress. The person who practiced all 5 before needing them rests in month 3. The person who did not is still awake at hour 72, making decisions they believe are correct in a position selected while already impaired. Build the protocol now. Test every component before the scenario forces you to rely on it. Know your own collapse markers before you reach them. Do not wait until hour 40 to decide how you will handle hour 72. Rest is not the absence of readiness. Rest is the condition that makes readiness possible.